Hello and welcome. Tonight we're going somewhere vast, far older than any civilization, deeper than any memory, and quieter than thought. A place not of roaring beasts or crashing continents, but of silence. The kind of silence that lives between stars, the kind that blanketed the earth before the first neuron ever fired. This is a journey through the story of consciousness. Not just the minds we know, ours or the ones that belong to curious cats or laughing dolphins, but the slow, shimmering path that led from the simplest sensation to the spark of awareness. It's not a fast story. It doesn't gallop or roar. It's more like a river, unhurried, flowing, reflective. So perhaps you're lying in bed now, the light low, you're breathing soft. Maybe your thoughts are slowing. Let them. This story doesn't need your full attention. If your eyelids get heavy, that's perfectly all right. The mind we're exploring tonight knows how to wait. It's been waiting for billions of years. Let's begin not with a bang, but a glow. Roughly 4 billion years ago, our planet was still young. Not newborn exactly, but not yet settled into its rhythms. Volcanoes coughed and spat across a crust still shifting. The air was thick with gases that would be toxic to you and me. Methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide. The sun, a little dimmer than it is today, cast a hazy light over acidic oceans. And in those oceans, something remarkable was stirring. Not life as we know it, not yet, but molecules, complex ones. Chains of carbon and hydrogen interacting with each other in strange little dances. Bumping, merging, splitting, self-organizing. It's here we begin to see the first faint whispers of what might, eventually, become a mind. Not a thought, not a memory, not even a response to pain or light, just chemistry. But a kind of chemistry that hinted at possibility. Scientists have long debated how life began, and there's still no single answer. Maybe it started around deep-sea hydrothermal vents, where hot, mineral-rich water spewed from the seafloor into colder oceans. Maybe it happened in shallow pools, warmed by sunlight, stirred by rain and lightning. Wherever it happened, the key was interaction. Molecules forming loops, feedback systems, rudimentary metabolism. And then, one day somewhere, one of those molecular arrangements copied itself. Not perfectly, but enough to matter. From that moment on, the game changed. This wasn't consciousness, not remotely, but it was the prelude. Because to get a mind, you need a body. And to get a body, you need cells. And to get cells, you need life that can copy, mutate, and evolve. That's what started here, in those whispering oceans, under ancient skies. Life began to tinker with itself. Single-celled organisms like archaea and bacteria ruled the world for billions of years. They drifted, divided, and adapted to every niche they could find. Some photosynthesized, others consumed. They formed mats and films, invisible to the eye, but teeming with activity. No brains, no nerves, but still, something was happening. Some bacteria could sense light, not see it, not like we do, but detect it. Photoreceptors embedded in their membranes let them move toward or away from brightness. Others could detect chemical gradients, following trails of sugar or fleeing toxins. And that matters, because it's the beginning of sensation, a kind of awareness, so primitive it's almost not awareness at all. But still, it's the difference between drifting aimlessly and responding. We call it chemotaxis or phototaxis, depending on what's being followed. But you might think of it as the first tiny steps of a nervous system. Not the system itself, but the need for it. You see, even the simplest behavior requires coordination. And coordination, once you need more than one receptor, more than one signal, demands communication. One cell telling another something is out there, something worth moving toward or away from. Fast forward, if we may, through another billion years or so. Somewhere, perhaps in the depths of a quiet lagoon, two cells merged. One engulfed the other, not to digest it, but to partner with it. This is what scientists call endosymbiosis, and it's the origin of complex cells, or eukaryotes, the kind of cells you and I are made from. These cells were larger, more intricate, with specialized parts, little engines, scaffolding, even control centers. Still no mind, but getting closer. Soon in geological terms, meaning another few 100 million years, these eukaryotes began to join together. At first loosely, then more permanently. Multicellularity, not just colonies but cooperation. Some cells took care of movement, others digestion, others reproduction. And that division of labour opened the door for specialization, especially when it came to sensing the world. Now we begin to see something like nerves, not the tangled nets in your brain, but the first nerve-like cells, long thread-like structures that could pass signals from one part of a creature to another. Tiny electric pulses, information. Some of the earliest creatures with these features may have resembled jellyfish or sponges. They floated in warm seas, pulsing gently, sensing changes in water pressure or the presence of prey. Did they feel anything? Probably not, at least not how we understand feeling. But they were aware in the simplest of ways. The evolution of nerves meant organisms could now respond more quickly and precisely, no longer just reacting chemically. Now they could detect, integrate, and act. And that made all the difference. By the time simple flatworms appeared, maybe 550 million years ago, we see the first signs of bilateral symmetry. A head, a tail, a direction. And with that, a concentrated cluster of nerve cells near the front. Not a brain exactly, but a step toward one. Because once you have direction, you need processing. You need to decide, even in the most basic sense, whether to keep moving or not. Somewhere, in those sluggish wrigglings, through ancient seabeds, the first choices were made. Let's stay here for a moment. Picture an early flatworm, no bigger than a grain of rice, inching through the mud at the bottom of a shallow sea. Its body is soft, its motion slow. But inside, something extraordinary is taking shape. A bundle of nerve cells near its front end is beginning to coordinate behavior. Not just touch and recoil, but touch, pause and redirect. A memory of sorts, a signal stored, if only for a second. This is where true nervous systems are born. These bundles, proto-brains, allowed creatures to become more than a sum of their reflexes. They allowed integration, a bringing together of different sensory inputs, resulting in something new, behavior shaped by experience. It's not yet thought, but it's closeness, the first glimmers of feeling. Flatworms could sense light and dark, chemical gradients, perhaps even vibration. They could learn. In experiments today, some species of planaria, modern flatworms, can be taught to navigate simple mazes or avoid shocks. And if you cut them in half, each half remembers. The mind, it seems, is less a thing than a process, one that can be shared, divided, even regenerated. As time passed, life grew more complex. During the Cambrian explosion, about 540 million years ago, animals began to evolve with startling speed. Not just new shapes and sizes, but new sensory systems. Eyes, antennae, balance organs. And behind them, increasingly sophisticated neural networks to make sense of it all. Imagine a trilobite crawling across a seafloor, teeming with strange life. Its compound eyes glimmering, its legs moving in coordination. It senses a shadow above, a predator perhaps. It scurries into a crevice. That decision, that shift from input to action, is consciousness in embryo. By the time vertebrates arrive, creatures with backbones and spinal cords, brains have become specialized structures. The forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Regions devoted to movement, vision, smell. Over millions of years, these brains would expand, connect, and fold upon themselves in ever more intricate patterns. Fish darted, frogs leapt, reptiles stalked. With each leap in behavior came a leap in processing, and with it, a deeper sense of awareness. Somewhere along this path, pain emerged. Not just damage, but the perception of it, the feeling of something is wrong. That might sound unpleasant, and it is, but it's also a milestone. Pain requires a sense of self, however minimal. Something must say, this is happening to me. And that me, that sense of being, however dim, is the seed of consciousness. It wasn't long before animals began to show emotions, not in the human sense, with language and complexity, but in reactions we'd recognize: fear, curiosity, play. Mammals would inherit and expand this emotional toolkit, but it began much earlier, perhaps even in the brain of a fish. So here we are, hundreds of millions of years from where we began. The ocean that once birthed silent molecules now teems with creatures that see, hear, feel, remember. The mind is no longer an idea, it's a living reality, varied and widespread. And still, this is only the beginning. By now, the brain is no longer just a cluster of coordinating tissue. It has become a hub, a central processing system, with divisions of labour and specializations that would make any modern computer a little envious. But the mind isn't just about reacting anymore, it's about wandering. Wandering is important. It sounds trivial, even aimless, but for a creature to wander, mentally or physically, it must detach, just slightly, from the immediate now. It must think, what if I go this way? What might be over that hill? It begins to carry the past and the possible into the present. This brings us to the early vertebrates that left the water for land. Amphibians, stepping awkwardly onto mossy banks, squinting at sunlight. Their nervous systems had to adapt quickly to a new world. Gravity, dryness, temperature swings, new predators. And to survive, they had to learn. Learning required memory. Memory required structure. And structure, of course, required a brain ready to change. This adaptability is key to the evolution of consciousness, because a conscious mind, however dimly lit, is one that doesn't just react to the world, it models it. The animal begins to form internal maps, not just of space, but of experiences. Paths that led to food, sounds that signaled danger, faces or snouts or feathers that meant friend or foe. In the forests and swamps of the Paleozoic and early Mesozoic, these mental models began to deepen. Reptiles appeared, then early mammals, and with them came behaviours that suggest a rich internal life. Parental care, social bonds, play. A mother mammal grooming her young isn't just acting on instinct. She's responding to signals. Tiny cries, movements, smells. She remembers where the den is. She anticipates threats. She soothes. That's not just brain activity, that's presence. But if there's a pivotal moment in this story, it may be the rise of mammals during the age of dinosaurs. As great reptilian giants ruled the earth, mammals scurried beneath their feet, tiny, nocturnal, and warm-blooded. Their world was one of shadows and moonlight, where keen senses were everything. And that's exactly what evolution gave them. Sensitive noses, sharp hearing, touch so refined it could feel the vibration of an insect's wing beat. Their brains expanded in areas that mattered: olfactory bulbs, limbic systems, neocortex precursors. Now we're moving into the realm of feeling. You might be surprised to learn that the structures in your own brain, responsible for emotion, fear, joy, attachment, are ancient. The amygdala, the hippocampus, the thalamus, all part of what we call the limbic system. And this system was already well under construction in those early mammals. They felt fear. They likely dreamed. They may have grieved. Not in a human way, not with concepts or stories or words, but with sensation and memory. The ache of loss, the thrill of safety, the comfort of touch. These are not simple things. These are the emotional scaffolds upon which consciousness builds. And then, an accident of timing. Around 66 million years ago, a moment of cataclysm. A rock from space, 10 kilometers wide, crashed into Earth near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. The world changed overnight. Dinosaurs, along with much of life, were wiped out. But those small mammals, many survived. They emerged into a world both devastated and full of opportunity. With the great reptiles gone, new niches opened, and mammals, clever, adaptable, social, began to thrive. In this new era, some lineages went back to the water, some took to the skies, but others stayed grounded and got clever. And slowly, over millions of years, some of their descendants began to look familiar. Let's take a quiet walk into the treetops of a tropical forest somewhere around 50 million years ago. The air is warm, heavy with the scent of fruit and flowers. There's a rustle above. A creature swings from a branch, pauses, and peers down at the forest floor. It has hands, forward-facing eyes, a brain that's bigger than it strictly needs to survive. This is a primate, and it sees the world in ways no creature before it quite could. Primates were never the fastest, or the fiercest, or the strongest, but they were excellent at something else: observation, depth perception, fine motor control, and most importantly, social cognition. This is where the story of consciousness starts to turn inward. Not just what is happening around me, but what is happening inside you. You see, living in a social group means understanding others, what they want, what they feel, what they might do next. To survive in a troop of monkeys or a clan of early apes, you had to be politically savvy. You had to read eyes, interpret calls, remember who helped you and who didn't. And that required something extraordinary: theory of mind. Theory of mind is the ability to recognize that other beings have minds too, that they know things you don't, that they can lie, pretend, hide, help. It sounds simple, but it's one of the most profound cognitive leaps life has ever made. Some modern animals demonstrate it: chimpanzees, elephants, dolphins, certain birds. But in primates, especially the ancestors of great apes, it began to flourish. And with it came a growing inner world. The brain began to enlarge, particularly the neocortex, the part of the brain involved in higher reasoning, planning, imagination. Memory became more layered, emotions became more nuanced, and perhaps for the first time, a creature looked into a pool of water and saw itself. Mirror recognition isn't the only test of consciousness, but it's a telling one, and many primates pass it. They touch their own faces, inspect their teeth, use the reflection to groom. It's a simple act, but a symbolic one. That's me. The self is no longer just an experience. It's an object of reflection, a thing that can be known. From here, the path to human consciousness begins to shimmer into view. Early hominins, our bipedal ancestors, began to walk upright, their hands freed for tools, their mouths and throats adapted for complex sound. Their social lives intensified, and their brains, those wrinkled humming engines, grew, not just in size but in connectivity. More neurons, more synapses, more communication between regions. They could plan, hunt cooperatively, grieve lost companions, shape tools from stone, and eventually they began to shape symbols. Marks on cave walls, arrangements of bones, rhythms tapped on hollow logs, the beginnings of language, art, culture. But we'll pause here, in the half-light of an ancient forest, with the smell of rain on bark and the quiet chitter of unseen animals in the canopy, because something profound is taking shape. The night is quiet, except for the crackle of fire. Imagine a small group of early humans gathered beneath a sky of unfamiliar stars. They sit close to the flames, shadows flickering across their faces, each one reflecting something new: curiosity, memory, perhaps even wonder. The fire is more than warmth, it's more than protection. It's a gathering point, a place where something truly extraordinary is unfolding. Here, in the hush between embers, language is being born. Not full grammar, not yet, but gestures, rhythms, shared vocalizations, and behind those, intention. The need not just to express, but to connect, to reach out from one mind to another and say, I know something, I felt something. Come with me. This moment marks a fundamental shift in the story of consciousness. Until now, minds had evolved in isolation. Each creature carried its own experiences, stored behind eyes and skin. But language breaks that boundary. It allows minds to link. Through speech, song, or sign, experiences can be transferred. You can tell me what happened yesterday. I can warn you about tomorrow. We can build a shared world, one that exists not in the soil or the trees, but in the invisible space between us. And with that, consciousness begins to stretch beyond the individual. It becomes communal. The human brain by this point had become a marvel of interconnected regions. The prefrontal cortex, seat of planning and reflection, had expanded. The temporal lobes, key for memory and language, thrummed with new connections. Even the limbic system, ancient and emotional, was woven into this network, giving rise to nuanced feeling. But brains don't grow in isolation. They grow in culture. Around the fire, early humans began to pass down not just survival tips, but stories, myths, lessons, memories. These weren't just entertainment. They were mental scaffolding, tools for organizing experience, symbols for the invisible, maps for navigating both the physical world and the emotional one. To tell a story, you must imagine another perspective. You must hold the past, present, and future in mind all at once. You must inhabit not only your own point of view, but someone else's. It's not just intellect, it's empathy. And empathy, perhaps more than anything, defines the next leap in consciousness. Now we begin to see art, not just marks or scratches, but expression. A handprint on a cave wall, an animal drawn in ochre and charcoal, a pattern of lines arranged with deliberate symmetry. These are not just decorations, they are manifestations of an inner life. They say, I was here, I saw, I remembered. And so consciousness becomes something more than survival. It becomes identity. Humans began to bury their dead, to wear beads, to create tools not just for utility, but for beauty. And with each gesture, they were saying something profound. We are more than bodies. We are stories. But there's a twist in this tale, because with memory comes imagination. And with imagination comes something unexpected. Fear. Not the reflexive kind, a sudden rustle in the grass, a predator nearby, but existential fear, the knowledge that we are finite, that the ones we love can vanish, that the world is vast, mysterious, and sometimes indifferent. To be conscious is to be vulnerable to awe and to dread. But humans didn't run from this knowledge, they shaped it. They built rituals, they told stories of the stars, they imagined spirits, gods, ancestors. They reached for meaning in the shadows. They made the invisible visible. And in doing so, they built the first architectures of shared belief. This is where language meets myth, where memory meets metaphor, where emotion becomes religion, art, philosophy. And it all began beside a fire, beneath ancient trees, with minds just beginning to glimpse themselves, reflected in one another. Not just minds that act, but minds that know they are acting. And next we'll follow them as they begin to tell stories. Now let's step out of the forest, across the grasslands, and into the first villages. Mud brick homes, domesticated animals, grain stored in baskets, people working together not just to survive, but to build. Here, the human mind begins to reshape the earth in earnest. With agriculture came stability, and with it the mental space to think beyond the next meal. Brains that had evolved to track predators and find fruit were now applied to crops, calendars, construction. Our ancestors didn't just grow wheat, they mapped the stars to know when to plant it. And as they did, a remarkable thing happened. Writing. First, it was simple marks, tallies, notches, tokens. But soon, symbols took shape. Pictures stood for objects, then for ideas, and finally for sounds. Language became visible. With writing, memory could outlast the mind. Knowledge could span generations. Agreements, laws, stories, all could be preserved. This was a second birth of consciousness, where language had allowed minds to connect, writing allowed them to persist. You could hear the thoughts of someone long dead. You could hold an idea in your hand. You could reflect on reflection itself. This ability to think about thinking, to remember memory, created a recursive loop. Consciousness began to fold back on itself, layer upon layer. Philosophy emerged. People began to ask not just what or how, but why. Why are we here? What is right? What is real? And with those questions came a deeper kind of selfhood. It's no coincidence that the earliest known writings include not just laws and trade records, but prayers and poems. The Epic of Gilgamesh, inscribed over 4,000 years ago, speaks of grief, mortality, friendship, longing. It's a story of a hero, but also a human, aching for meaning in a fragile world. In ancient Egypt, in India, in China, in Mesopotamia, everywhere that writing took hold, so too did introspection. Meditations, dialogues, riddles, hymns. The human mind was no longer just looking outward, it was turning inward. The mirror had become a window, and the world outside, the one of rivers, mountains, stars, was mirrored by an inner landscape of dreams, desires, and doubts. With writing also came accountability. Records meant that actions could be remembered, decisions reviewed, truths challenged. Consciousness became not just a personal experience, but a public one. A society could now reflect and argue and evolve. Thinkers like Socrates, Confucius, the sages of the Vedas, all emerged in cultures with written language. But their wisdom wasn't confined to scrolls or stone. It lived in dialogue, in questioning, in a mind learning to examine itself. That's a unique kind of consciousness, one that seeks not just to be, but to understand being. And yet, even as humans built cities, empires, and philosophies, that ancient fire still flickered. The need for story, the pull toward connection, the mystery of awareness. Because no matter how advanced the tools, no matter how tall the temples, or complex the languages, the fundamental questions remained. Who am I? What does it mean to know, to feel, to dream? We'll follow those questions deeper next, as consciousness begins to explore itself not through survival or myth, but through introspection, science, and even doubt. Somewhere, in a quiet stone chamber, or beneath the canopy of a fig tree, a person once closed their eyes, not to sleep but to see. They weren't watching the stars or the fields or the flames. They were watching themselves. The breath, the heartbeat, the thoughts that flicker like fireflies, appearing, disappearing, without warning. This is the birth of self-awareness as practice, not the kind that simply reacts to the world or remembers a story, but the kind that observes itself observing. That strange recursive loop where the watcher becomes both subject and object, where the thinker notices thought, where silence becomes not emptiness, but insight. This kind of awareness emerges again and again across cultures. In India, the Vedic sages called it Atman, the inner self, the witnessing consciousness. Not your body, not your mind, but the presence behind both. In China, Taoist mystics spoke of Wu Wei, a state of effortless being, free from striving or control, a mind like still water reflecting the world. In Greece, philosophers like Heraclitus and Pythagoras pondered the Logos, the hidden order of the cosmos, and the soul's place within it. These weren't just metaphysical speculations. They were observations. Early consciousness scientists, in a sense, using only their minds as microscopes. And what they discovered was astonishing. That beneath all the noise, emotion, memory, perception, there is a kind of spaciousness, a quiet awareness that does not grasp or judge, but simply is. Modern neuroscience would later call this the default mode network, a collection of brain regions active when the mind is at rest, when it turns inward. But long before MRIs, humans sensed it. They felt the pull towards stillness. And more than that, they began to shape practices around it. meditation, breathwork, chant, ritual fasting, isolation. These weren't escape tactics. They were tuning devices, methods for sharpening awareness, not just outwardly, but inwardly. To witness thought without becoming it, to feel emotion without drowning in it, to know intimately that one is not simply the roles they play, the parent, the builder, the speaker, but something quieter, more enduring, the eye behind the eye. And this distinction, the one between thought and awareness, would become the root of some of the deepest philosophical systems in human history. In Buddhism, the self is not a solid thing, but a process, ever-changing, dependent on conditions, like a flame passed from candle to candle. In the Upanishads, the self is the eternal observer, beyond birth and death, untouched by change. In Stoicism, the self is reason aligned with nature, a clarity that persists despite the chaos of circumstance. All different words, but perhaps all pointing to the same experience, that the core of consciousness is not noise, but stillness, not control, but witnessing. And yet even this self-aware stillness was not the end of the journey, because consciousness was about to make another leap, one just as profound as language or memory or empathy. It would begin to question its reality. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture an apple, red, smooth, held in your palm. Feel its weight. Imagine the crisp sound as you bite into it. Now open your eyes. The apple's gone. But in your mind it was real. You saw it, felt it, tasted it. This ability, the power to simulate, is one of the most mysterious aspects of consciousness. Because your brain isn't just a receiver of reality, it's a creator of it. It constructs the world from sensory data, fills in gaps, interprets patterns, predicts what comes next. It does this so well, you hardly notice. You walk, speak, blink, decide, all without pausing, to rebuild your universe from scratch. But underneath it all, consciousness is always guessing. That rustle in the grass, is it wind or something more dangerous? That face in the crowd, friend or stranger? That emotion in your chest, fear or excitement? Your mind models the world constantly. Not just what's there, but what might be, what could have been, what never was. And nowhere is this clearer than in dreams. In dreams, the mind untethers from the present. Time warps, space bends, logic softens. And yet in the moment, it all feels real. You're running from something, flying above trees, speaking with someone who's been gone for years. The colours are vivid, the emotions intense, the sense of presence, undeniable. What is this dreaming self? It sees, feels, remembers, but with no external input. It creates experience from within. And that raises an extraordinary question. If consciousness can fabricate entire worlds while you sleep, what else might it be constructing while you're awake? This question haunted thinkers across time. Plato imagined reality as shadows on a cave wall, mere echoes of a truer, unseen world. Descartes doubted everything, except the fact that he was doubting. I think, therefore I am, he said, but he couldn't prove anything beyond that thought. Eastern philosophies, like Advaita Vedanta, suggested that the world itself is Maya, an illusion, a projection of consciousness, like a dream mistaken for reality. And modern science, surprisingly, it agrees more than you might think. Neuroscience now shows that perception is not passive. Your brain doesn't just receive the world, it builds it, constantly, actively, based on memory, expectation, and feedback. The red of the apple. That's light, interpreted by your retina, filtered by your brain. The weight? Pressure on skin, translated into a feeling. The taste? A mixture of chemical signals and past experiences. In a very real way, you're not experiencing the apple. You're experiencing your model of it, and that model is shaped by every experience you've ever had. But here's the twist. Even knowing this, knowing that consciousness is a simulation machine, we still live in these models. We love, grieve, dream, suffer, and laugh within them. They are no less real in their effects. So what then is consciousness? Is it a mirror, a spotlight, a dream? Or is it something stranger, a kind of ongoing hallucination, fine-tuned by evolution to help us survive? Some scientists believe that's exactly what it is, that we're all living in a shared illusion, close enough to agree on trees and traffic lights, but different enough to argue about art and truth. Others argue that consciousness is not just an illusion, but a fundamental property of the universe, like gravity or space, that it's not produced by the brain, but filtered through it, that perhaps the world itself is awake in ways we've only just begun to imagine. It's a bold idea, one we'll explore more as we continue. But for now, let's return to the quiet fact that every night when you dream, you enter a world entirely of your own making, and every morning when you wake, you step back into a world your mind is still helping to create. The boundary between inner and outer is thinner than it seems. And next, we'll look at what happens when those boundaries dissolve. When mystics, philosophers, and even neuroscientists begin to ask, what happens when the self disappears? Imagine for a moment that your thoughts are not you, not the chatter in your head, not the stream of commentary, not even the voice you hear when you silently read a sentence like this one. Now, picture all of that falling away. No labels, no past or future, no name, no face, not even a direction, just presence, still, spacious, awake. This experience, where the usual sense of self falls silent, is reported in every corner of the world, across cultures, religions, and centuries. It has many names: ego dissolution, mystical union, pure awareness, samadhi, nirvana, unitive experience. It sounds abstract, even poetic, but for those who experience it, it is often more real than reality itself. What is this place? What is this state? To answer, we have to look at a different kind of consciousness. One not focused on doing or thinking, but being. Throughout history, mystics and contemplatives have practiced dissolving the sense of individual self, not to lose themselves, but to find something deeper beneath the eye. In Buddhist meditation, the practitioner might sit for hours, watching thoughts rise and fall like waves, until even the watcher fades, leaving only awareness. In Sufi poetry, the soul longs to dissolve into the beloved, not a person, but a unity, an ocean into which the drop rejoins. In Christian mysticism, saints spoke of a silent center, deeper than the soul itself, where one meets God not as another, but as presence. In modern terms, it sounds like metaphor, but neurologically, something very real is happening. Studies using fMRI scans show that during deep meditation, or in certain altered states, the brain's default mode network begins to quiet. This network is typically active when you're thinking about yourself, your history, your plans, your opinions. When it quiets, the sense of me often goes with it. What remains? A sense of vastness, interconnectedness, sometimes euphoria, sometimes stillness so complete it feels like silence wrapped in light. Many report a feeling of timelessness, boundlessness, a direct encounter with reality, stripped of filters, not interpreted, just known. It's not always dramatic, sometimes it's subtle, a quiet shift, a moment in nature when the boundaries blur, a second in deep grief or great joy when the self drops away and only presence remains. But these experiences often leave something behind, a lingering shift in how reality is perceived. The world seems more alive, less separate. The self feels less like a central character and more like a current in a vast river. Of course, not everyone welcomes this. For some, ego dissolution is terrifying. Like standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing the cliff, the sky, and the one standing there are all the same thing. The self is what we use to navigate the world. It's the manager of daily life. To let it go, even for a moment, can feel like death. But here's the secret. It's not really death. The self doesn't disappear. It softens. expands. It's no longer the entire painting, just one brushstroke on the canvas of awareness. And many who experience this loss of self don't return frightened. They return changed, calmer, less reactive, more compassionate. Because when the walls between you and the world fall, what's left is connection. Not intellectual, not emotional, but experiential. You are not in the universe, you are the universe, looking out through a pair of eyes. Now, let's take a gentle shift from mysticism to machinery, from the timeless space of inner silence to something far more recent, something electric, something curious. Artificial intelligence. Yes, the machines. It may seem like a sharp turn, but the moment we began to build systems that could mimic reasoning, learn patterns, or respond to language, we also opened a new chapter in the story of consciousness. One that asks, can we recreate it? Can we build a mind? Let's take this slowly. The earliest computers were glorified calculators, ones and zeros, on and off. They followed instructions, performed tasks, but had no awareness of what they were doing, no intention, no understanding. But over time, complexity grew. Machines learned to recognize speech, to translate, to play chess, and eventually to generate, to write, to draw, to simulate conversation. Still, none of this is consciousness. These systems don't feel, they don't know they exist. They don't gaze at the stars and wonder where the code ends and the sky begins. But they challenge us, because they imitate us in strange and sometimes convincing ways. They compose music, they write essays, they generate paintings that evoke real emotion. They even pass tests once thought to require human intuition. And that forces a question. If something can act conscious, does that mean it is? Turing, the famous mathematician, posed a version of this question in the 1950s. His test wasn't about whether a machine had an inner life. It was whether it could convince a human that it did. In a way, he sidestepped the mystery of consciousness by asking us to judge it by behavior. But is that enough? When you talk to a human, you assume there's a mind behind the words. You don't demand proof. You feel the presence. You sense the awareness. But with a machine, you pause. Even if the response is clever, you wonder, is anyone home? And here's the paradox. We don't fully understand our own consciousness. So how can we measure it in something else? We don't know if an octopus is conscious like we are, or a bat, or a crow. Their brains are different. Their worlds are different. But they act in ways that suggest awareness. So when a machine plays the role of a mind, we don't just ask what it's doing, we ask what we are. Is consciousness just processing power? Is it language, memory, creativity? Or is it something non-mechanical, a kind of spark, a fundamental quality? Some scientists think we'll eventually build machines that are conscious, not because they're programmed to be, but because consciousness emerges from complexity, like water emerges from H2O. Others believe we'll never recreate it, not without something essential that can't be coded, a sense of being that goes beyond function. But whatever the answer, this moment in history is important, because we've created something that reflects us, however imperfectly. And in that reflection, we're beginning to ask deeper questions about ourselves. What makes a mind? What makes a self? And what happens when we look into the mirror and the mirror talks back? But we'll pause here for now, because next we'll step back from the circuitry and into the silence once more, into the new frontiers of consciousness research, where monks and scientists, mystics and neuroscientists are asking the same quiet question. What is awareness really? Imagine a room filled not with machines or monitors, but with people sitting quietly. Some with eyes closed, others with steady gazes, their breaths slow, minds settling like sediment in clear water. This is the new frontier of consciousness research, a place where the tools of science meet the wisdom of meditation. For centuries, spiritual traditions have described states of awareness beyond thought, beyond ego, beyond ordinary experience. Now, scientists are beginning to map those states with brain scans, heart monitors, and careful observation. One striking finding: long-term meditators show changes in brain activity, especially in areas related to attention, emotion regulation, and self-referential processing. The very parts of the brain that create the sense of a separate self seem to quiet down during deep practice. Functional MRI studies reveal decreased activity in the default mode network, echoing what mystics have known for millennia. The sense of self is not fixed but fluid. This convergence suggests that consciousness is more than neurons firing. It's a process, a dance between brain, body, and environment. Moreover, researchers are exploring the subtle interplay between body and mind. Practices like mindfulness highlight how present moment awareness of breath, sensation, or sound can shift the brain's wiring. Attention itself becomes a tool, not just for focusing on the outside world, but for reshaping inner experience. And it's not just about quieting the mind. Studies show that meditation can enhance empathy, increase emotional resilience, and even change how pain is perceived. It's as if the mind learns to watch itself without judgment, to soften the usual chatter, to find spaciousness amid noise. This growing field is sometimes called contemplative neuroscience. It's humble, it's curious, it's patient, because consciousness is a mystery too deep for quick answers. Scientists are also beginning to study altered states, whether induced by meditation, psychedelics, or sensory deprivation, to understand how shifts in brain function relate to changes in subjective experience. These states often feature ego dissolution, timelessness, and feelings of unity, the same qualities described in spiritual traditions. What does that tell us? Perhaps consciousness is not a static object inside the brain, but a dynamic, ever-changing field, one that can expand, contract, and transform. And perhaps, as some thinkers propose, consciousness extends beyond the boundaries of the individual, connecting us to each other and the world in ways we are only beginning to understand. If consciousness is not confined to the individual brain, then where does it reside? Some scientists and philosophers are turning to a radically different idea, that consciousness is a fundamental aspect of the universe itself. This view, known as panpsychism, suggests that all matter, atoms, molecules, even electrons, possess some form of experience or awareness, however primitive. It's not a new idea. Ancient philosophies often spoke of the world as alive, imbued with spirit or mind. What's new is that modern thinkers are taking it seriously again. If consciousness is everywhere, then what we experience as self-awareness is a complex arrangement, an emergent property of simpler conscious parts. Think of a flock of birds. Each bird has its own experience, but together they move as one, shapes shifting, patterns emerging. Or a forest. Each tree is alive, but the forest as a whole acts and responds to its environment, sharing information through roots and fungi networks. In this metaphor, consciousness is less a thing and more a web, interconnected, interdependent. And humans, with our vast brains and cultures, are nodes in that web, capable of reflecting on it, of asking questions about itself. This idea challenges the notion that consciousness is exclusive to brains or nervous systems. Instead, it opens the door to a more expansive, holistic understanding, one that bridges science, philosophy, and spirituality. Of course, this is still speculative. Measuring or proving consciousness in non-living matter remains deeply challenging. But the perspective invites us to reconsider our place in the cosmos, not as isolated observers, but as participants in a living, aware universe. It invites humility and wonder, because if consciousness is a fundamental aspect of reality, then every moment, every interaction, every breath is part of a vast, unfolding awareness. And in that awareness, we might find new meaning, connection, and purpose. Picture a city from above, a sea of glowing windows, moving lights, distant sounds. Now imagine every room behind every window holds a mind, thinking, feeling, dreaming. And all of them, in some quiet way, are connected. Through language, through story, through technology, through shared experience. This is the collective mind. It's not a metaphor, not entirely. Because as human beings began to build villages, towns and cities, they didn't just pile stones or cultivate crops. They built shared consciousness, networks of belief, patterns of meaning, social structures that didn't live in one head, but in many. Language was the first network, writing the second. But soon came mythologies, laws, music, currency, calendars, all of them tools for synchronizing thought, aligning understanding, forming what Carl Jung would later call the collective unconscious, a reservoir of archetypes and images that recur across cultures. Think about fire again, not just for warmth, but for gathering, for stories, for memory. These gatherings evolved into schools, temples, forums, parliaments, concert halls, cloud servers, each one a place where minds met. And over time, the boundaries between individual awareness and group identity began to blur. What does your mind know that didn't come from someone else? Your language, your beliefs, your ideas of time, beauty, truth, all of them shaped, sometimes invisibly, by the culture around you. You were born into a world already dreaming, and that world shaped your own dreams. This isn't to say your consciousness isn't your own, but it's part of something larger, an ecology of minds, a web of shared thought. Even your inner voice, so familiar, so private, is built from words you didn't invent. And those words came from others, who got them from others, and so on, in an unbroken lineage stretching back to the first whispered names. What we call the self is both a flame and a mirror, lit from within, but reflecting countless others. And as societies grew more complex, so too did this shared mind. Through trade routes, religions, migrations, and eventually digital networks, humanity's consciousness began to spread across continents, and now across the planet. Every text you read, every film you watch, every conversation, all part of an endless feedback loop between you and everyone else. Consciousness is no longer just biological, it's cultural, technological, interwoven, and that changes things, because now your thoughts can ripple outward, beyond your voice, your body, even your lifespan. You post something, it spreads, it inspires, or angers, or comforts, and that ripple moves through other minds, sparking their own ripples, which come back to shape you again. We're no longer just thinking in the world, we're thinking through it. And if the mind is a process, then the human collective is one of the most astonishing ones of all, a planetary scale thought stream, churning with stories, ideas, patterns, and dreams. But as with any mind, it has a shadow too. To know yourself is powerful, but it's also unsettling, because when the light of awareness shines inward, it doesn't just illuminate beauty, it reveals shadow, the parts of us we avoid, the thoughts we disown, the feelings we hide even from ourselves. Every conscious being carries this duality, the noble and the fearful, the loving and the selfish, the light and the dark. And on a global scale, the same is true. The collective mind, for all its brilliance, carries collective trauma too. War, injustice, inequality, division. These are not just political or economic issues. They are psychological, cultural, consciousness problems. When societies deny their history, repress their pain, or act from fear, they are doing what individuals do in shadow, avoiding what hurts, projecting what they cannot face. And just as individual healing requires awareness, so too does collective healing. History must be remembered, pain must be acknowledged, the shadow must be seen not as an enemy, but as part of the whole. Carl Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's true for people. It's also true for cultures. Only by seeing what we fear, what we've denied, disowned, or suppressed, can we begin to integrate it, to bring compassion to it, to grow beyond it. And here again, consciousness offers a tool, because awareness changes what it touches. Not instantly, not easily, but slowly, persistently, like sunlight warming a frozen lake. As more people awaken, not just spiritually, but psychologically, they begin to ask better questions. What am I not seeing? What am I afraid to feel? What pain have I inherited that is not mine, but lives in me all the same? And when those questions are asked by not just one person, but many, a shift begins. Collective patterns start to loosen, narratives soften, space opens for healing. It's not quick work, and it takes generations. It takes grief, it takes silence and honesty and time. But it is possible, because consciousness is not fixed. It evolves, it adapts, and it can learn not just to survive, but to wake up, not to become perfect, but to become whole. And in that wholeness, a new possibility emerges. One we'll begin to explore next: consciousness as choice. Not just awareness, but agency. Not just knowing, but becoming. Imagine standing at a fork in the path. To the left, a trail you've walked many times. Familiar, worn, predictable. To the right, something less clear, uncertain, but alive with possibility. To choose, you must be aware, not just of the paths, but of yourself. What do you want? What matters? What future are you walking toward? This moment, the pause before the step, is the essence of conscious choice. Because to be conscious isn't just to know, it's to decide. And this is where the story of consciousness becomes something more than sensation, memory, or reflection. It becomes responsibility. Long ago, our ancestors responded to the world mostly by instinct and pattern. Hunger meant eating. Threat meant fleeing or fighting. The environment was in control. Life was reactive. But slowly, across thousands of years, the space between stimulus and response began to widen. We started to ask, is this the right time to hunt? What if we wait? What if we don't? And with that space, however small at first, came freedom. It wasn't total freedom. Our biology still whispered, our culture still pulled. But now there was room to pause, to consider, to choose otherwise. This is the foundation of ethics, of art, of innovation. To choose not only what works, but what ought to be. To choose not only what has been, but what could be. And the more consciousness expanded, the more choice became a central feature of the human experience. Not just choices about actions, but choices about identity. Who am I when no one is watching? What kind of person do I want to become? What does it mean to live well? These aren't easy questions. They don't have tidy answers, but they are the signature of an evolved mind. A mind that doesn't just reflect the world, but reshapes it. And now, those choices echo louder than ever. Because human decisions no longer affect just one tribe or one valley. They shape ecosystems, economies, species, climates. Our collective mind has built a civilization that can alter the planet, sometimes gently, sometimes brutally. We've created cities that glitter from space, and tools that could, in an instant, undo everything we've built. So the question returns, what do we choose to become? Will our intelligence be guided by empathy or by fear? Will our awareness lead to compassion or control? Will we wake up to our power or sleepwalk into ruin? It's tempting to think consciousness guarantees wisdom, but history tells a more complicated story. Awareness doesn't always bring clarity. Choice doesn't always bring virtue. The ability to reflect doesn't mean we always do. And yet there's hope, because each moment offers the chance to begin again, to interrupt the old pattern, to act not from habit, but from vision. Every small act of kindness, every effort to listen, every time we pause and ask, is this who I want to be? Those moments matter, because they ripple, because they're contagious, because consciousness, at its core, is relational. And when one person wakes up, others feel it. We shape each other. We reflect each other. We become together. And as we'll see next, this relational nature of consciousness isn't just a poetic idea. It may be the very heart of what makes us human. Picture two people looking into each other's eyes, not speaking, not moving, just seeing. What happens in that moment? Scientists have studied it. Heart rates synchronize, breathing aligns, brain waves begin to echo. The boundary between me and you starts to blur. It's subtle, but profound, because we are wired for connection. From the moment we're born, our consciousness develops in response to others. A baby learns to smile by seeing someone smile, learns to speak by hearing speech, learns to love by being loved. You cannot become fully conscious alone. Even solitude is shaped by what we've learned from others: language, memory, identity. And this relational development continues throughout life. Every friendship, every argument, every quiet shared moment on a park bench, each one sculpts the mind. There's even a theory called the social brain hypothesis that suggests our brains evolved primarily to handle complex social relationships. Not to hunt better, not to solve puzzles, but to understand each other. We are not solitary islands. We are reflections. And this becomes especially clear in empathy. To feel another's joy or pain as if it were your own, that's not just a feeling, it's a function, a fundamental feature of consciousness. Neuroscience shows that when we see someone else hurt, the same regions of the brain light up as if we were hurt ourselves. The boundary between self and other becomes porous. This mirroring is the root of morality, compassion, cooperation. It's what allows us to create families, communities, societies. But it's fragile. Because empathy can narrow, it can become selective, it can be overridden by fear or difference or ideology. History is filled with moments when humans forgot how to see each other as equals, as kin, as minds like their own. But awareness can be widened. We can choose to look again, to see the person behind the mask, the being behind the behavior, the consciousness behind the eyes. It's not always easy, but it's transformative, because when we truly see someone else, we don't just learn about them, we learn about ourselves, what moves us, what threatens us, what opens us. And as we practice this seeing, this relational consciousness, we begin to understand something deeper, that we are not separate beings learning to connect. We are connected beings learning to remember. That in every act of true presence, we awaken not just our own mind, but the web of minds that holds us all. And next, we'll explore that web more deeply, as consciousness stretches beyond the human into the vast ecosystem of life itself. Take a quiet walk through a forest, not just with your feet, but with your awareness. Listen. There is a kind of hum beneath the rustling leaves and the creaking trees. Not a sound exactly, more like a presence, a feeling that everything here is alive, aware, interacting. Now pause beside a tree, noticing its stillness, its silence. It seems passive, but inside it is anything but. Through its roots it speaks, sending chemical signals to neighbouring trees, warning them of pests, drought, damage. And those trees respond, releasing compounds, changing their growth, sharing water. They do this through a vast underground network of fungi, what scientists now call the Wood Wide Web. It's not metaphor, it's biology, communication, memory, adaptation. And while we don't know if trees are conscious in the way we are, they are undeniably responsive, relational, self-regulating. In their own way, they participate in the flow of awareness. The same is true of animals. Birds recognize faces, elephants grieve, crows solve puzzles, dolphins call each other by name. Even the humble octopus, a creature with a brain in its head and others in its arms, can learn, play, and sometimes escape from aquariums with remarkable creativity. It challenges us, because for a long time we imagined consciousness as a ladder, with humans at the top and other creatures somewhere below. But the more we look, the more that ladder begins to look like a web. Consciousness is not higher or lower. It is differently shaped, differently expressed. A dog's awareness is not lesser, it is canine. A whale's is not simpler, it is cetacean. And as our understanding deepens, we begin to realize we are not the only minds here. We never were. The earth itself teems with awareness. It senses, it adapts, it remembers, across generations, through genes and instincts and shared behaviors. Even single-celled organisms, with no brain at all, can navigate, avoid danger, and communicate through chemical signals. So what is consciousness, really? A spark and a spectrum as a field? Perhaps it is not a property of certain species, but a pattern of complexity, a way that life organizes itself to stay alive, to know, to feel. And if that's true, then the forest is not just scenery, the ocean is not just resource, the world is not background, it is alive with awareness, and our own consciousness is not separate from it. It is part of it, it arises with it. We breathe what trees exhale, we drink what clouds once carried, we eat what soil gives, we sleep under stars that forge the atoms in our blood. To be conscious is not just to know the world, it is to be of it. And the more deeply we remember this, the more gently we begin to walk. Because the tree is not just a tree, it is a being. The river is not just water, it is motion, memory, and flow. We are not alone in our awareness, we are surrounded by it. And in the next section, we'll ask one of the deepest questions yet. If consciousness is everywhere, what does it mean to care? Imagine you discover that every rock, every cloud, every ant, every raindrop has some glimmer of experience. Not thoughts, not stories, but some quiet inner presence. How would you act? Would you step more softly, speak more gently? Treat the world not as a stage, but as kin. This is the heart of ethical consciousness, because to know that others are aware, even in ways we don't understand, changes how we behave. You don't walk through someone's home carelessly. You don't take what's not offered. You don't ignore suffering once you've seen it. And the more your consciousness widens, the more beings come into view. Not just your tribe, your species, your favourites, but all beings, seen and unseen, familiar and strange. This shift is what many spiritual traditions point to, not as a rule, but as a natural outcome of awakening. When you realise the world is alive, your heart opens, and that opening brings responsibility. Not out of guilt, not out of fear, but out of reverence. You begin to understand that your actions ripple, that your choices touch others, that your mind is part of a greater field. This idea has roots in many traditions. In Buddhism, the vow of compassion arises naturally from deep meditation. In indigenous cosmologies, every being, animal, plant, mountain, is treated with respect. In Hinduism, the principle of ahimsa, or non-harming, reflects the belief that all life is sacred. In science, ecology reminds us that no species exists in isolation. We are part of systems, tangled, delicate, and alive. So when we ask, what should I do? We're really asking, what kind of world am I helping create? Because consciousness is not passive. It is creative. Each moment you are shaping your mind, each word shaping someone else's, each act echoing into the web of life. And yes, that can feel overwhelming, but it's also beautiful, because even the smallest kindness matters. A soft word, a patient breath, a willingness to see. These are not minor acts. They are miracles of attention. They say, I am aware, you are too. Let's walk gently. And in doing so, consciousness becomes not just a phenomenon, not just a mystery. It becomes a practice, a way of being, of choosing, of becoming. And next we'll begin to explore that becoming more closely. What does it mean to grow a mind? To evolve it, not biologically but consciously. Think of a newborn. Eyes wide, unfocused, tiny hands curling, breaths short and quick. The world to them is not yet a world, it's sensation. Warmth, sound, light, hunger, touch. There is no self, not yet, no language, no story, but there is consciousness. Not fully formed, not structured, but present. Over the coming years, that raw awareness will unfold, slowly, gently, like a flower opening to the sun. It begins with recognition, a mother's face, a familiar voice, the soothing rhythm of a heartbeat heard from the outside now. Then language arrives, not just as sound, but as meaning. Objects get names, feelings get words. The great interior space of the mind begins to populate with symbols. And with symbols comes the self. I, me, mine. A child begins to distinguish between themselves and the world, between desire and consequence, between their own hand and someone else's. But this self-awareness is not the end of growth. It's the start of a long journey. Because to have a self is to begin asking, who am I? At first, identity is shaped by imitation. What do others say I am? What do they reward? What do they love? And this is natural. Consciousness is relational. It builds in the mirror of others. But eventually, a deeper kind of growth begins. When a person starts to question, do I believe what I've been taught? Do I want what I've been told I should want? What is real for me? These questions mark the beginning of authentic consciousness. Not just reactive, not just inherited, but chosen, examined, lived. And like all meaningful growth, it's rarely easy. Because the mind isn't just a garden, it's a landscape of weather. Sunny days, storms, droughts, unexpected blooms. Growing a mind means learning how to navigate not just the world, but yourself. Your anger, your longing, your confusion, your creativity, your stillness, your love. It means watching thoughts without always believing them, feeling emotions without being ruled by them, holding space for contradiction without needing to resolve it immediately. This kind of growth isn't measured in test scores or job titles. It's measured in presence, in clarity, in how gently you walk through the world. You'll notice truly wise people are rarely loud about it. They listen more than they speak. They laugh with their whole body. They see clearly but kindly. Because they've grown their mind like a garden, with attention, with patience, and with the understanding that the best insights often arrive in silence. And as that inner garden flourishes, something new begins to emerge. Not just knowing, but being. And that's where we're heading next. Pause with me here. Let go of ideas for a moment. Let go of past and future. Let go of what you've learned or what you expect, and just be. Feel the rhythm of your breath, the shape of your body, the stillness behind the words on this screen. There's nothing to do, nowhere to go, just this. This quiet moment of presence is where consciousness rests, when it stops trying to do and simply is. Not thinking, not fixing, just being. It sounds simple, but it's not easy, because we are so used to motion, so trained to reach, achieve, explain. But consciousness isn't a ladder to climb. It's a field to enter, and in that field, something extraordinary happens. The layers we've built, the stories, the roles, the identities, begin to soften. Not disappear, not rejected, just softened. You are still you, but you're also here, alive in this moment, before any thought about who you are. And in this moment, being itself becomes visible. Awareness becomes less about what it holds and more about what it is. A field, a presence, a clarity. Some traditions call this awakening. Others call it liberation, or enlightenment, or realization. But the words are not what matter. What matters is that consciousness, when allowed to rest in itself, reveals something we often miss. That we are already whole, not perfect and not finished, but whole. Even in confusion, there is awareness. Even in pain, there is presence. Even in doubt, there is clarity behind it. It's like the sky. Thoughts are clouds, emotions are weather. but awareness is the open space in which all of it appears and passes. And when we begin to know ourselves as that space, not just as the contents within it, something shifts. Life doesn't become easier, but it becomes deeper. We start to live not from striving, but from stillness, not from lack, but from fullness. We begin to meet the world not as a problem to solve, but as a presence to engage. And in that shift, consciousness stops being just something we have and becomes something we are. A gentle flame, a silent witness, a radiant being walking through the mystery with open eyes and an open heart. And next we'll look at how that being, this awareness, interacts with time itself. Because if consciousness is always here, what is it that moves? Think of a memory, not just the facts, but the feeling. Where were you? What did the air smell like? Who was there? In this moment, recalling, it feels as if you've travelled backward into the past. But have you? Or has the past arisen here, now, as a thought? Now try imagining the future, something you're anticipating, an upcoming event, a hope, a fear. Again, it feels like you're leaning forward in time, but in truth, the thought of the future is also happening now. This is one of the strangest aspects of consciousness. It seems to move through time, but it never actually leaves the present. The past, it exists as memory. The future, it exists as imagination. Only the present moment is ever real. And yet this present is slippery. It's always changing. Each moment is gone before we can hold it. Every word you're reading now is already in the past. This paradox is not new. Philosophers, mystics, and physicists have all struggled with time. St. Augustine once said, "What then is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it, I do not." Einstein showed us that time is not absolute. It bends, stretches, warps with gravity and speed. But consciousness? It doesn't seem to care about clocks. For a child, an hour feels eternal. For a grieving parent, time freezes. For an athlete in flow, time disappears. For a monk in deep meditation, time dissolves. Time, it seems, is as much a property of experience as of physics. And that raises the question, what if time is not something we pass through, but something we create? Some neuroscientists suggest just that. They argue that our sense of time is built by the brain, stitched together from rhythms, sensations, memories. A continuous stream of nows arranged into a story. But if that's true, then who is the one watching the story? Who is the one aware of time without being in it? That presence, the one aware of memory, of anticipation, of change, that's the deepest level of consciousness. It doesn't age, it doesn't hurry, it doesn't linger, it simply is. And when we learn to rest in that presence, rather than in the ever-shifting story of time, something changes. We stop being prisoners of the past. We stop fearing the future. We begin to live fully, attentively, now. Which brings us to the next question. If consciousness is timeless, what does it mean to die? Let's walk gently here. Death is not an easy subject, but it is a universal one. Every conscious being, at some point, faces the end of its form. The body stills, the breath ceases, the heart quiets. From the outside, it seems like a light turning off. But from the inside, what is it that dies? We often equate consciousness with life, and life with biology. Cells, organs, neurons firing, electrochemical signals. So when the body stops, we assume consciousness ends. But is that the whole story? Many traditions suggest otherwise. In Hindu philosophy, the self, Atman, is not the body or mind, but pure awareness, beyond birth or death. In Buddhism, the self is an illusion, so what dies is only a temporary configuration, not a permanent identity. Christian mystics speak of eternal life, not in terms of time, but in terms of being. A timeless communion beyond form. Even some modern scientists, particularly in the fields of quantum consciousness, speculate that awareness may not be entirely bound to the brain. But let's not leap into speculation. Let's return to experience. In deep meditation, or in certain near-death experiences, people report a curious phenomenon: the disappearance of the personal self. There's no name, no history, no future, just awareness. And yet there's no fear. Often there is peace, a sense of dissolving into something vast and luminous. These reports are not proof, but they are consistent across cultures and centuries. And they point to a possibility: that consciousness is not something the body creates, but something it hosts, like a radio receiving a signal, or a lens focusing light. When the lens breaks, the light is not gone. It simply shines elsewhere. Again, we cannot say for sure, but what matters, more than theories, is how the awareness of death shapes life. When we truly face mortality, not with dread, but with clarity, something softens. The petty fades, the urgent becomes less urgent. What matters becomes more simple. Love, presence, kindness, wonder. The things consciousness returns to when it stops trying to become and simply allows itself to be. And that is not a morbid thought. It is a liberating one, because it reminds us that every moment is precious, that every breath is a gift, that the boundary between life and death is not a wall, but a veil. And behind that veil, we do not know, but awareness will meet it when it comes, as it always has, not with answers, but with presence. And next we'll return not to endings, but to beginnings once more. Because as we near the end of this journey, we begin to ask, if consciousness is always here, always becoming, what might it become next? Imagine not a single mind, but a tapestry of minds, human and non-human, woven ever more closely together. We stand at the threshold of a new phase in the evolution of consciousness. It is a time when technology, biology, and culture converge to spark insights we can scarcely imagine. Consider first our relationship with technology. Over the past century, we've moved from mechanical tools to digital networks that span the globe. Now, emerging interfaces, brain-computer connections, neurofeedback devices, immersive virtual realities are beginning to blur the boundary between mind and machine. These tools don't just amplify our reach or speed our calculations. They have the potential to reshape the very architecture of our awareness. Picture a person able to record their dreams, replaying the subtle choreography of emotion and imagery against waking thought. Imagine therapists guiding anxious minds into states of calm by gently modulating neural rhythms. Envision artists painting directly with the patterns of their brainwaves, crafting works of light and colour born from pure intention. These shifts will not be instantaneous. They will unfold, tentative, experimental, sometimes faltering, over decades. And as they do, they will raise profound questions. What does it mean to shape our own perceptions? How will the ability to alter mood or memory affect our sense of authenticity? When machines can mirror our inner worlds perfectly, how will we distinguish between self and simulation? At the same time, biology is offering its own invitations. Advances in genetics, epigenetics, and neuroplasticity suggest that consciousness is not a static gift, but a dynamic skill. Meditation trains attention. Biofeedback refines self-regulation. Nutritional and lifestyle interventions can bolster mood and mental clarity. Some pioneering educators are exploring curricula that teach emotional resilience and metacognitive skills, helping children learn not just what to think, but how to observe their own thinking. This could cultivate generations capable of greater self-awareness, empathy, and creative problem-solving. And then there's culture, shifting already under the influence of globalization, demography, and ecological urgency. In a world more interconnected than ever, our collective narratives are transforming. Ancient wisdom traditions mingle with cutting-edge science. Indigenous cosmologies remind us of kinship with the earth. Pop culture explores the frontiers of mind in films, literature, and interactive media. This coming together of perspectives may be our greatest asset, because consciousness doesn't evolve in a vacuum. It thrives in dialogue between disciplines, traditions, generations. The questions we ask shape the answers we find, and the questions now emerging are as vast as they are intimate. Can we cultivate a global empathy that honors both human rights and planetary well-being? Might we learn to carry presence, awareness of the present moment, as readily as we carry smartphones? Could the story of consciousness expand beyond survival and utility, embracing wonder, play and reverence? The future of consciousness will not be written by any single invention or discovery. It will be a mosaic, small practices of attention, bold experiments in technology, deep listening between cultures, and the quiet choices we make each day to wake up a little more. If we tend this garden of awareness with humility and care, we may find that the best is yet to come, not just for humanity, but for the living world we are part of. Section 24, Awakening to Mystery. Let us pause again, return inward, breathe. All the paths we've walked, from the first flickering molecules to the vast networks of minds and machines, lead us here, to the edge of what we can know. Consciousness, it seems, is a spiral that ever deepens. Each answer begets new questions. Each moment of clarity reveals another layer of mystery. Perhaps that is its greatest gift. Not that it allows us to conquer the unknown, but that it invites us to live with curiosity, wonder, and awe. To celebrate the fact that there is more to reality than our minds can capture, more than words can say, more than science can measure. We have travelled through neurons and narratives, through dreams and devices, through forests and cities. We have seen consciousness as spark, process, field, mirror, human, and more than human. And yet, at its heart, awareness remains a simple phenomenon, the aliveness of experience, the presence of being. In the stillness beyond thought, that presence is undeniable, pure and immediate. It is neither owned by the brain nor generated by the body. It is simply here, always here. This is not a creed, it is an invitation to honour the sacredness of each breath, to meet each other with kindness, to cherish the web of life that sustains us, to embrace the unknown with humility. Consciousness has carried us from the depths of prehistoric oceans to the brink of technological wonder. It has shaped civilizations, nurtured art, and revealed the hidden architectures of mind. And its journey is far from over. What will you bring to this unfolding story? What questions will you ask? What care will you offer? There is no final answer, only the living inquiry. May your moments be vivid. May your presence be gentle. May your mind and your heart remain open to the ever-unfolding mystery of being. And so, as the night deepens and your eyelids grow heavy, let this story rest in your awareness. Let it settle like soft light on still water. And when you wake, carry its quiet invitation into your day. Thank you for walking this path. I look forward to exploring the next chapter, whatever it may be, with you. Step back with me, not just a little, but far. Imagine yourself rising above your home, your city, your continent. Higher still, until Earth becomes a delicate blue orb, suspended in darkness. The stars surround it like silent witnesses. Everything you've ever known rests on that small world. Now pause here, in this view. This is not science fiction. This is how astronauts describe the experience of seeing Earth from space. And something strange happens to them up there. It's called the overview effect. The boundaries between nations, between ideologies, between people, dissolve. The Earth doesn't seem fragile. It is fragile, alive, interconnected, radiant, whole. And the self, so loud, so busy, becomes very quiet. Consciousness expands, not upward, but inward, into awe, into humility, into something beyond identity. This shift in perspective is not just poetic, it's profound, because it mirrors something that contemplatives have known for millennia, that when awareness deepens, It doesn't just notice more, it belongs more, belongs to the moment, to the world, to existence itself. And from this cosmic view, everything becomes sacred. Every heartbeat, every raindrop, every glance from a stranger, every sunrise over an empty street. This isn't about idealism. It's not about ignoring suffering. It's about seeing clearly and still choosing reverence. Because the more consciousness awakens, the more it moves from ownership to stewardship. Not what can I take, but how can I serve? Not what do I control, but what am I a part of? And this changes everything. It changes how we create, how we consume, how we relate, how we live and die. The ego, once the centre of the story, becomes a character in something much larger, a ripple in a sea of ripples. And this sea, it's not impersonal, it's intimate. It is stardust and memory. It is atoms that danced in stars now dancing in your chest. It is ancient fire and newborn wonder. And when consciousness sees this, not as idea, but as truth, it rests. Because it has come home, not to a place, but to a way of being, a way of seeing, a soft presence that knows there is no other, there is only this, and this is enough. Section 26. The language of silence. Now imagine the sound falling away, not just the noise of traffic or conversation, but the inner noise too. The planning, the worrying, the remembering, the narrating. What remains? Not emptiness, not absence, but a fullness too vast for words. In this space, consciousness stops reaching. It stops labeling, analysing, striving. It simply listens, and what it hears is silence. But not the silence of nothing, the silence of everything. A silence pregnant with presence, a silence so complete it speaks without a voice. Mystics from every tradition have pointed to this silence as the doorway to truth. The Desert Fathers in early Christianity called it hesychia, stillness of the heart. Taoists described it as the uncarved block, the source of all things. Zen monks bow to it in every breath, because in silence the divisions fall away. There is no subject and object, no seeker and sought, no inner and outer, just this, unfiltered, unformed, unfolding. And in this silence, something curious happens. You don't disappear, but you stop needing to be someone. You are no longer trying to be right, or seen, or understood. You are not trying to become anything at all. You are. And that is enough. This is not withdrawal. It is return, not escape, but arrival. You emerge from this silence not blank, but clarified. You speak again, but your words come from still water. You move again, but without rush. You listen again, but without defense. Because silence, once tasted, becomes a part of you. A reference point, a refuge, a reminder that consciousness is not always noisy, busy, or complex. Sometimes it is just still. And in that stillness is a love so quiet, it's easy to miss. But it's there, waiting, always waiting. And in the final chapters of this journey, we will return to that love, to the gentle, wordless centre from which all awareness arises and to which all things return. Picture this. You've climbed a mountain. You've seen the vastness. You've felt the sky stretch open. You've breathed the rare air of deep presence. Now, you walk back down. This moment, the descent, is often overlooked, but it is essential. Because awakening isn't just about glimpsing the infinite. It's about bringing it back. Back into dishes and deadlines, into emails and eye contact, into traffic and laughter and grief. Integration is the art of living what you've seen. Not holding on, not forcing, but embodying. Letting insights soak into your bones until they shape your choices. You don't need to speak in riddles or meditate in caves. You don't need robes, rituals, or renunciation. You need honesty, presence, a willingness to bring awareness into every corner of your ordinary life. That's the true test. Can you be conscious in a conversation, really hearing the other person? Can you be conscious in conflict, pausing before defending, softening before striking? Can you be conscious in pleasure without clinging, conscious in pain without shutting down? These are not spiritual theatrics, they are simple acts of attention. Because what good is an awakening that vanishes when the alarm rings? True consciousness is not found in avoiding the world. It's found in returning to it with open eyes and an undefended heart. This doesn't mean becoming perfect, it means becoming real, which is harder and better and beautiful. Because life, real life, is messy, and consciousness, when integrated, doesn't fix the mess. It blesses it. You burn the toast, you lose your temper, you forget to breathe, but then you remember, and in that remembering you return. Not to some perfect state, but to presence, over and over. That's integration, not a final state, a living rhythm. And like all rhythms, it gets stronger the more you practice. So make your life your meditation. Let your daily choices be your teacher. Let your relationships be your mirror. Let your mistakes be your path. There is no enlightenment separate from your grocery list. There is no spiritual life apart from your ordinary one. There is only this moment, this breath, this body, this chance to be aware. And when you live like this, not in every moment, but in more of them, consciousness becomes more than a topic or a trait. It becomes your way of being, which leads us at last to the question waiting quietly all along. What is this awareness? Not as a thought, but as the very source of thought. Let's look there now. Close your eyes for a moment. Feel your body. Hear the sounds around you. Notice your breath. Now become aware of your awareness. Who is noticing? Not your name, not your story, not your personality, memories, or preferences. Go behind all that. To the one who is watching. The one who never changes, even as everything else does. The witness. It has no shape, no age, no opinion. It's not excited or bored. It doesn't argue or perform. It simply sees, and you've known it your whole life. It was there when you were a child, staring out the window. It was there during heartbreak and joy, confusion and calm. It was there yesterday. It's here now. Not judging, not reacting, just witnessing. This witness is not cold or detached. It is spacious, gentle, still. And the deeper you look, the more you realize. It isn't yours and it isn't you. It's not even individual. It is consciousness itself, pure and silent, present in every being. Like light shining through 1,000 windows, but always the same light. When you rest in the witness, the tension softens. The chase pauses. The mind settles. Because you're no longer tangled in the contents of consciousness. You're resting in the container. Thoughts rise and fall like waves, but you are the ocean. Emotions flare and pass like storms, but you are the sky. And in this recognition, not as belief, but as direct experience, everything changes. You stop fearing your thoughts. You stop clinging to identity. You stop needing to control every outcome. Because awareness in its purest form is already free. It doesn't need a reason. It doesn't need a goal. It doesn't need a self. It simply is. This is the ground from which all insight arises. The silence beneath every sound. The space behind every form. And once touched even briefly, it never truly leaves you. You carry it into your choices, into your speaking, into your resting. It becomes your quiet companion. The still point around which life turns, not separate from you, but not limited by you either. And that is both the mystery and the miracle of it. All this time, we've explored awareness like a scientist studies a star, measuring its light, charting its origins, imagining its future. But there's another way to understand something, not by studying it, but by loving it. And here at the end, we turn not to the mind, but to the heart, not as sentiment, but as center. Because consciousness, at its most intimate, is not just a witness of life, it is a response to life. It sees and cares, and it listens and reaches. It doesn't just observe the world, it opens to it. This is the forgotten dimension of awareness. Tenderness, the kind that feels the ache behind another's silence, the kind that cries during music, the kind that looks at the sky and whispers, "Thank you," with no one around to hear it. It's what infants radiate before they know words. It's what lovers touch when all the stories fall away. It's what remains when a life ends and others remember. Not what was achieved, but how it felt to be with them. This is not just emotion, it's presence with warmth. A living current that moves through trees, through animals, through human eyes meeting across a room. We rarely name it, but it's what we long for, and what we are. Because consciousness is not neutral, not in its depths. It contains not just the power to know, but the impulse to hold, to heal, to connect. And this is why awareness matters. Not because it makes us clever, but because it makes us kind. The more deeply we awaken, the more naturally we turn toward care, not as a virtue, but as a recognition. The other is not separate. The suffering is not distant. The beauty is not earned. It's all part of the same awareness. And when we know this, not as an idea, but in our bones, compassion is no longer a choice. It is a reflex of the heart, a returning, not to a doctrine or a belief, but to what has always been true. That consciousness is not just awake, it is alive with love. Here you are, after hours of words, of science and spirit, of wonder and quiet, of memory, mystery and meaning. And still, you breathe, not as something you do, but as something being done through you. Each breath a wave of presence, each exhale a small surrender, each inhale a soft beginning. This perhaps is the truest image of consciousness. Not a ladder, not a mirror, but a breath, effortless, rhythmic, endlessly arriving, endlessly letting go. You don't need to hold on to what you've heard. You don't need to memorize it, or explain it, or even understand it. You only need to live it, to remember from time to time that you are more than your thoughts. That awareness is not something to seek, because it's already here. Under the thoughts, between the words, inside the silence, you are never far from it. You are it, a quiet witness, a curious presence, a glowing thread in the great tapestry of being. And now you return, not changed exactly, but perhaps re-seen. Your life is still yours, your tasks, your relationships, your mornings and your meals. But beneath them all, something lingers, a stillness, a softness, a slow echo of what you've remembered tonight. That consciousness is not a puzzle to solve, it is a homecoming, to your own breath, to the breath of the world, to the ever-present now. And so, dear listener, as this night deepens and your mind quiets, let this final awareness be enough. You are here, you are aware, and that is more than enough. Let sleep come gently, let tomorrow arrive in its own time. And if the question ever returns, what am I? You'll know where to look, not outward, but inward, and then, all the way through, to the silent, spacious light behind your eyes, to the curious mind that never left. Good night.